which way they went.
I have to say that I've never, well, I mean, I've surfed, but I don't think you can really call it surfing. But like, is that something that happens, that you're underwater for long enough that you could consciously sort of say, I'm going to blow a bubble and see which direction it moves in?
That's what I'm wondering too. Because I think in both of these examples, if you haven't been in these scenarios, you might say, how can you not know which way is up? You'll feel it. But when you are packed into avalanche snow, or when you are disoriented, you've spiraled, you're surrounded by water, you're buoyant everywhere, it is not immediately obvious.
So there are other scenarios when this kind of total confusion of which way is up, which direction you're in happens, slightly more unusually, in the microgravity of the International Space Station, or in space rockets in general. So because so one of the ways that you're anchoring yourself is of course vision, looking at which way gravity is working, where the horizon is, and so on. But you also have inside your ear, in this sort of semi-circular canals, these incredibly intricate design. It's essentially like a biological accelerometer, which can tell which way you're moving and which way you're oriented. But when you're in microgravity, the system, which relies on gravity pulling it downwards, end up floating freely. And they start signaling to your brain that you are constantly falling and flailing. But your eyes, meanwhile, see this very static cabin. So your brain panics because, of course, for the whole history of our evolution, the only situations you'd be in when your eyes didn't match what your ears were telling you would be if you'd been poisoned.
Or if you were falling, if you were in free fall.
True. If you were in free fall, yeah, of course.
Both of them are bad scenarios.
I would say very bad. If you're falling long enough for you to for your brain to register that there's a mismatch in prehistoric times, I would say overall bad. I would say things are not looking good for you or your future offspring. But the thing is that it sort of assumes that it's this that you've had some kind of toxin, so it kind of pulls this emergency cord, getting you to vomit.
The puking is a really good thing. Like, your body is trying its best to say, look, if I've been poisoned, let me get out what's in the stomach. It might have been something I just ate. So if you're dizzy, if you're in the vomit rocket, like, throwing up is your body's like primitive way of fixing what we invented.
Right, totally. And the thing is, there is like a lower level of this. People who are car sick or travel sick in general, your body is feeling the physical sensation of this car moving, accelerating, braking, moving around. But it's especially prevalent if you're reading or looking at your phone. You're watching something that's static, and your body is like, these two things don't mesh, time to feel sick. Which is why the trick to, if you feel car sick, is to look out the window, sort of connect yourself with the outside, to connect yourself with motion. Anyway, most people feel a little bit of sick when they end up in the space station. But there was one guy, a senator, who flew to space on the space shuttle, called Jake Garn, and he really struggled, like a lot. So he vomited so much that NASA decided they should set a new metric of 1.0 gons is like the limit of how much a human can reasonably vomit when they experience this situation. Most people get to 0.1 gons, by the way.
How specific is it? Like, could I use it to measure my symptoms?
That's a good thing. I think you just need to kind of shade this expensive.
If I was him, I would not see it as shade. I would see it as an honor. I'm down in the history books. I'm podcast fodder now. I'm a measure of vomit amount. Like, at least that's something.
It's true. It's going to live on beyond you, beyond your lifetime. This whole thing about this mismatch between your ears and your eyes, your ears in general, working which way you're up. There's something really dangerous that can happen to pilots with this, because inside your ear, the way that this works partly is about fluid moving through your ear, through these little canals. And that means that if you enter into a really long, steady bank, as you would if you were flying an aircraft, or sort of like doing a wall, what can happen is that the fluid can eventually catch up with the canal walls, which means your brain then thinks that you're level, even though you're still banking. So what has happened in the past, this is called the graveyard spin, is that when the pilot finally levels the plane to go straight, the fluid shifts again, which means that the brain thinks that actually you're banking in the opposite direction. It thought you were banking and you've gone straight, and it thinks you were straight and you're banking in the opposite direction. This is a really big problem in the RAF. That pilots would have to overrule their body believing that they were banking, because otherwise what they would do is correct for this sort of phantom turn and then re-enter the original spin, and then they end up spiraling downwards. They feel like they're perfectly level, but then of course can end up getting themselves in a position that they can't then pull out.
Wow, that's a great example of why your instruments are so important in a plane. And why pilots need to learn how to do instrument-only flying. Like literally, with the windshield blacked out, you should be able to fly the plane, take it off, land it, because the human body is just, it acclimates to the bank, and it's not built for that kind of thing. What a great example of that, because I always think it would be so scary to not be able to see if I was a pilot, and yet in reality the instruments know better than you, because your instrument did not evolve for slow aircraft banking.
I mean, your body almost never lies to you. But when it is strapped into a hunk of metal and flying through the sky at like crazy altitudes and pulling strange maneuvers, your body is going to lie to you. Your body is going to lie to you.
Did you know, speaking of the vestibular system and fluid in the ear giving us a sense of balance, I have top shelf vertigo. Yes. So, what that means is if I look up, like if I'm looking at the top shelf of something, usually when I'm looking up at a skyscraper, I'll go ahead and do it. When I look up like that, and I come back down, I get very dizzy. I don't know which way is up. And the funny thing that this causes is that if I'm drinking out of a can, and I'm walking, and I'm finishing the can, I have to go like way up high. Then I come back down and I stagger around and stumble like I'm drunk, so it looks like I'm drinking beer and I'm really drunk for only about like 2 seconds, and then it normalizes. But it means that I just cannot. If I'm riding a bike and I look up at something, I'm gonna crash. So I have to just like never look up at things when I'm walking around a new city and everyone's like, wow, look at that skyscraper. I'm like, I'll Google it. I can't look up at it, because when I come back down, I'll fall over.
Have you heard of straws? Just a little suggestion there for you.
Oh man, I have heard of straws, but I never thought to connect the two.
So have you worked out why this is? I mean, it is, you have these like little canals, and it's about fluid moving through those canals, compared to sort of there's like hairs and little bones in there as well, right? So have you worked out why this might be?
I haven't looked up the cause. I just kind of embrace it as an unquestioned part of myself. But let me see. Oh, it's got a better name. Benign paroxysmal positional vertigo.
Top shelf is better though. Top shelf makes it sound like you get it every time you go to a supermarket. Reach for the beans.
Yeah, the crystals in my ear fluid slide around and they start spinning, like the sloshing of the liquid. I guess my brain doesn't correct for, because when I go back down, the water isn't like, oh, you're down again. The water's like, whoa, I'm still trying to find my balance, and my brain does not interpret that. It doesn't ignore that.
That's how you have to think of it. Imagine if you had a cup of tea in a car. You would, it'd be very messy for starters. But if you think that the rigid sides of the cup are going to move with the car, but you have the sort of inertia of the fluid will like slosh against the sides. That's essentially how it works inside of your ears.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, if you've got these subtle things either in the physical structure of your system or the way that your brain's interpreting it.
Yeah, for most people, that kind of confusion would only be caused by intense spinning. And then that fluid keeps sloshing after you stop and you feel dizzy. But for me, it takes the littlest motion and only looking up. If I look to the side quickly, I'm fine. If I look down, I'm fine. But for some reason, looking up, my brain goes, all right, this fluid's out of control. You're spinning. You're going to fall. Let's just fall over.
Have you ever been on one of those, NASA use them as training devices, I think, where they put you essentially in the center of a gyroscope and spin you around so you can move in all directions?
I did that at space camp. I earned my gold space camp wings, by the way, but let's not make this podcast about Michael's achievements. I went for 3 years, whatever, big deal. Point is...
Wait, as a kid?
As a kid, yeah.
Okay.
They've got 3 levels, and I got into them all, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I was a kid back then, and I didn't have top shelf vertigo back then. It was like a later in life phenomenon.
Okay, so this is what your body's using. Your body's using vision, fine, standard. It's using your inner ear stuff, but it also has this third mechanism to work out where you are in space, which is proprioception. So these are essentially the signals from your muscles, from your joints, and your skin. You basically have a map in your mind that you build up when you are extremely young. It tells your body where your arms and legs are positioned in space relative to your body, effectively at all times. The thing is, this can go wrong, right? So in the 1970s, there was this man called Ian Waterman, and he had this very rare viral infection that completely destroyed all of his sensory nerves for touch and proprioception below the neck. So he describes that essentially he woke up one day, he knew he'd been sick, he didn't lose any of the motor nerves, so he could move his muscles, but he describes how he woke up one day and he literally felt like he was a head floating on a pillow.
Yeah.
Like he felt as though he didn't have any body in space. And he could tell that his legs, one was under the duvet cover and one was out, because there was a temperature difference, but he couldn't tell that it was legs. He couldn't tell. It was just the weirdest, strangest feeling of being this sort of floating head in space. If he closed his eyes, he did not know what position his body was in, had no idea at all. The crazy thing about this story with Ian Waterman is that because he could still see his body, he was able to sort of look at his hand and go, okay, I want to move my hand from this position to that position. I want to clench my fist. So he had to relearn how to move his body, which he could only do by visually looking at it all the time.
By watching. Wow. See, this is a sense that we don't talk about very often, but when you imagine someone losing it, you realize how important it is. It's what allows you to close your eyes and stretch out your hand and touch the tip of your nose. Look at that. I didn't even look. And that's because I can feel where my body is. But if you lose that, like this guy did, that sucks. But what a phenomenal experiment and experience.
Totally. So that's you knowing where your body is, knowing which way up you are. But knowing where you are, so where you are relative to your surroundings.
In the environment.
Exactly. There is just some of my favourite research ever has been done in space to work out exactly how your brain works. So this story starts back in the 50s when they were doing some quite horrifying brain surgeries on people. Someone might have epilepsy or whatever, they were just going out a chunk of their brain.
Yeah.
And there was one patient in particular who had a section of his hippocampus and at that point, he could no longer recognise hospital staff, so some of his memory was damaged. But he also could no longer find his way to the bathroom. And this was the point where people realised that there was a connection. He couldn't recall day-to-day events of his hospital life. And this is the point where scientists were like, well, maybe navigation requires us making memories of space in this quite specific way. Maybe understanding where we are is down to us remembering where we've been, essentially. In the 1970s then, a little while later, there's a guy called John O'Keefe at UCL, my and he has worked out this way. He's basically invented a very precise little app that you can put on a rat's head. And this will measure the electrical signal from one neuron at a time. inside this rat's brain.
Wow.
So it's extremely precise. It's like a tiny little wire going into the rat's brain.
Into one brain cell, one neuron.
One brain cell. And this is the 1970s, so he hasn't got it rigged up to anything particularly fancy. It's just a little microphone that just goes pop when this neuron fires. And it's in the hippocampus of this rat, and this rat's having a lovely time. It's running around in this little space. And what he noticed is that this neuron would fire when the rat was in a particular part of the room. So the rat would run over there and it would go pop, and then the rat would run off in a different part of the room and it would go silent. And only when it went back to that exact same spot would this thing go off. So Jonathan's sitting there, and it's like popcorn, basically, the sound of popcorn whenever the rat is in this particular part of the room. So he's like, well, maybe there's something going on about that part of the room. So he took away all the food, he turned off the lights, and rotated the walls, and this cell still fired in the exact same spot in the room. And as he rotated the walls, the firing field rotated with them. It's the way the rat was orienting itself. Did I use the right word?
Orienting? Orientating sounds good too.
I don't know. It was working out where it was relative to the walls, and that's what this neuron was seeing.
And this was relative to the walls? So what about in the dark?
In the dark, you could still tell roughly where it was in the space, and the neuron still fired in exactly the same spot.
Wow.
So it's like this, it's almost like, the red pin you get on Google Maps.
Yeah.
It's basically like this neuron is firing at that moment. Now, a little bit later, they were like, well, let's see what this neuron does when we change the room. So they stretched the room, kept exactly everything the same, but just made the room a bit wider. Alice in Wonderlanding it, right?
Yeah.
And whereas before, this neuron had fired in a really tight little circle, now the neuron fired in an oval shape, where it had been stretched with exactly the same dimensions as the way the room was stretched.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That's such a cool experimental design. Stretched the room and you stretched the mental map.
Exactly. Which means that our internal maps, they treat rooms like balloons, right? Rather, that can stretch and that can bend. We're not taking direct, exact measurements.
It's like we didn't mean for this to happen, but life forms already are prepared to travel through space-time with all of its curvatures and stretching.
I mean, life forms live in space-time, so why not?
Why not? Bring on the nearly as fast as light vehicles. We're ready.
So by now, we have these really clear understandings of it. They're called place cells. That's what they've been named. There's some amazing experiments where they have mice. So you put on the same kind of hat, you pop it on a little mouse, and you hold the mouse steady, but you let its legs run on this kind of styrofoam ball, so it can run in any direction it wants to, like move around. And then you pop the mouse inside what is essentially like a IMAX for mice, right? So this curved screen, this projected space, it's in virtual reality. And then you let the mouse navigate through Quake 2 video games.
You are describing like a literal mouse
Yes.
for a computer. Like the old ball in the mouse, right, for a computer. This is the same ball, but there's a literal mouse on top of it.
Literal mouse on top who's controlling the direction. That's exactly what I'm describing. Exactly what I'm describing. But the key point about this is that the mouse believes it's in reality, I guess. It's sort of trying to navigate through a drink of water down one end of one corridor or whatever it might be. It can go in any direction it likes. But what they find is that the place cells don't distinguish between real spaces and virtual spaces. You still get this same pattern that one neuron will fire in one particular place, like a red pin on a Google Maps, in this virtual imaginary space.
Well, I didn't know they'd done this with mice. I did it to myself in an episode of Minefield. I worked with researchers at UC Irvine, and they had me run like a rat in a maze, like a giant human-sized maze. And they also scanned my brain to check the size of my hippocampus. then they had me play 3D video games for like a week or two, which I didn't play video games much. So this was like a big change in my lifestyle. I had to play like for hours and hours every day, navigating brand new novel 3D spaces. And after that, not only was I better at navigating real-life mazes, but also my hippocampus got physically larger, a little bit larger. Maybe it needed more cells, more place cells. And that all happened by exercising my sense of direction in virtual spaces. The brain didn't distinguish between the real and the virtual.
It doesn't care. And that's the thing, it's like all of this stuff about the eyes and the ears mismatching. You can get the opposite, by the way. You can get it where people feel VR sick, where the mismatch between the eyes and the ears isn't doing anything, but your eyes think something is coming, where you again feel really nauseous. But the brain, in terms of the way it's navigating, doesn't care. It's not, whether it's an imagined space or a real one, it's still firing in the same way. So you have this, you have these place cells, but the other thing that was probably growing inside your brain at the same time while you're doing all this practice is in the entorial cortex. So this is, by the early 2000s, everyone knows about place cells. But the question is, place cells are sort of like, here's a landmark, here's an interesting red pin on the map. But it doesn't really tell us how you navigate between them. It doesn't say anything about distance or direction. So some researchers looked in this other part of the brain, in this entorial cortex, and they did the same thing. They put a tiny little hat on a rat, looked to see when these neurons were firing. And they were firing as the rat was moving around, but it was a complete mess. And initially it just looked like a total junk. It didn't make any sense at all. And then they realized that maybe the room that they put the rat in was just too small. So they made it a much bigger room for this rat. And then realized that there is a second system that your brain is using. You have place cells, but you also have something called grid cells. The way that the mice's brain was mapping this space was almost like a chessboard. There is a neuron that fires every time that it goes through a white square. So if a rat runs from one side of the room to the other, this neuron will fire at regular intervals as it crosses the space. It's the same neuron. But you have not it's not just black and white, you have like many different grid cells. And they are, the cells are sort of overlapping with one another.
They're like spatial interval cells. It's not so much about the location, it's about, okay, you've covered 3 feet, and another 3 feet, another 3 feet. Are they sensitive to direction? Like one of them is just for east-west motions and one's for north-south?
No, they end up being this tightly packed grid. And actually, I gave the chessboard analogy, but they're actually hexagons. They're actually extremely neatly packed hexagons.
Oh.
And this is the thing, is that normally biology is a mess, right? Like, biology is like blobs and gradients and squiggles, and this was this pre-programmed coordinate system that was found in mice and rats and has since been found within humans. And this is the way that we're navigating. If you only had place cells, it's the same as having like a bunch of Polaroids of like interesting places, but no idea how they connect together.
Right.
And if you only had grid cells, you'd have a ruler and a compass, but no landmarks. And it's when you put those two together that you are able to navigate spaces.
They're two different systems. Man, I wonder if there are life forms that have only one and not the other. If they've got a more simple brain, and then through evolution, some of us, like rats, have both.
So one thing I do know is that I was working with some robotics in 22, 23, and they were trying to mimic this exact same system of grid cells and place cells, because they think that it is the most efficient way to navigate through the environment.
We've got these two systems, place cells and grid cells, and they aren't just like given at birth. They are dynamic through your life. As I was talking about, it's been shown, not just by my field, but by lots of studies, that the more novel places you visit and navigate, the physically bigger the hippocampus in your brain is. And I think one of the first and most famous places this was found was in the brains of London taxi cab drivers. Right? This is a famous story because in order to be a licensed taxi cab driver in London, you need to be able to work more than 20,000 streets and 100,000 landmarks, all within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross. There's a test you have to pass, and if you pass it, you have what they call the knowledge. Okay, the test is really so fun. It'll be something like you'll sit down at a desk, and the instructor will say, "Okay, so you pick someone up on Essex Road, and they say, 'I lost my cat. Help me find the cat.' And you start driving east. Name each street you pass as you go." And so they have in their brains a map made of many different systems probably that corresponds to the reality of London City.
I should say actually, my ex-husband, who I'm still extremely, really good friend with, he's doing this at the moment. He's learning the knowledge at the moment. So even though GPS now basically means you don't really need to know it all off by heart. In the 1850s, sure, when London, this web of streets is basically impossible to navigate for anyone who didn't know them. Now with GPS you don't need to, but there's still this real prestige that comes with it. There's also, I think, this idea that if somebody is willing to go through that, then they just have this professionalism and dedication to the job that you don't necessarily get with like a Larping or whatever it might be.
That's right. That's why I was so happy to learn that despite the fact that we all have GPS devices, the knowledge is still required
Oh yeah.
to be a black cab driver.
I mean, they earn good money, right? Like, it's a really good, well-paid job. You get to use the bus lanes in London. You can move around. I mean, black cab is still like the fastest way to move around in London in a vehicle. There's a cabbie who I know really well, a very good friend of mine, and I have played this game with him before where I've shown him pictures of streets in London to see if he can work out what the street is, see how quickly he can get the correct answer.
Can I submit one too?
You absolutely
Okay,
can.
let me send you one.
Okay, 1 second. Let's get on Street View. Okay, I've got one here. Right. What's this? Where is it? Should we reveal to the audience what I call it? Okay, so I'm looking at your picture. You went and got this on Street View?
Yeah, this is taken from Street View, and I'm like retro doxing myself. These are the shops next to Hereford Court, where I live when I live in London. Directly across from the Kingston Tube Station, on Kingston Park Road, looking away from the station to the right of Carrot Court.
Okay, alright, I'm going to give him a call. Let me send him a picture. With no comment.
Hello.
Hey!
Hello.
Did you see the image?
Yes.
Go on, where do you think it is?
Very quickly, straight away, I thought Brunswick Square.
Right.
Yeah, so you've got flats above shops, you've got trees around it. So that was my instant thought, but I don't know what the shops are. But looking at the shops, I think the Brunswick Square shops are maybe a little
Bit posher.
Yeah.
Shall I give you a clue? It's south of the river. Hang on, Michael. London cabbies don't go south of the river.
I know, that's why this is a really tough one.
In that case, okay, my other stab in the dark is somewhere around Kennington, the Elephant Castle, something like that.
Yeah.
Hey, you're right.
Wow.
It's Kennington Park Road.
Just about to say, okay then, so is it very close to the station, Kennington Station?
Yes, exactly. It's exactly across from the station.
That's good. That's really good, Rich.
There's a group of flats and shops just across the road from the station. There you go, I'm a
that's
genius.
You are a genius. Amazing. Rich, thank you. I appreciate it.
At least I haven't let you down.
No, you absolutely haven't. Thank you very much. I'll see you for my lift home later, yeah? Cheers, bye.
Bye-bye.
Very handy.
That's really cool. I mean, even knowing the science behind it, like, I shouldn't be surprised, but to see it happen in real life, the actual human trick of it all is just really makes me feel proud of our species.
I think this is the thing. If you haven't spent a lot of time in London and aren't familiar with the city, I think that you wouldn't necessarily appreciate just how phenomenally impressive that is. I mean, this city is vast, and we're picking streets completely at random with no discernible characteristics on them. There's no sort of shop signs, no awnings with names on, just like a random building somewhere random in London, and he's getting it pretty much spot on straight away.
Yeah. If you've never been there before, you might think, oh, well, it must be that each street has a very unique style of building, but it's much subtler than that. What he's able to do.
Yeah, well, there you go. Incredible what the human mind can do.
We've been talking about how the human brain orients itself in space, and we've talked about place cells and grid cells and liquid in the ear. We've talked about landmarks in the eyes, but language also plays a role in how we understand three-dimensional space. So in 2011, a team from the Max Planck Institute of Psycholinguistics decided to compare two groups of children. Okay, one group was from a tribe in Namibia, and the other was just some Dutch children. Okay, just some Dutch children. Yeah. To researchers, they're a dime a dozen. But what they did is they compared these two groups of children. Why? Because their languages were very different. Okay, the children from the Netherlands, their language involved words like left, right, in front of, and behind. These relative terms. Right? Left is different if I'm facing this way, if I'm facing this way. My left is different than your left. They're relative to me. But in the language spoken by these Namibian children, there were no relative directions. Everything was absolute. They only had words for north, south, east, west. And it's not always the cardinal directions. Other tribes have languages that are absolute in direction that might be in reference to, say, a landmark. Like, is that mountain, in front or behind you? Something like that. Anyway, in the experiment, they set up a table that, say, ran east-west, like a long table, and they lined up toys on this in a particular order. And they had the kids remember the order. And then they moved the table 90 degrees. And they asked the children to arrange the animals again in the same order they'd seen previously. And the Dutch children did it the way I think many of you listening would do it. They arranged them left to right in the same way. But the children from Namibia arranged them according to the cardinal directions. So instead of having everything go to the left, to the left, to the left, they said, well, no, the toys are now going to have to go the other way on the table because they used to all be facing south. And so I will keep them facing south because that's the way they conceive of space and objects in it.
It's so fascinating. So you end up with all these toys squished along the short run of the table.
Exactly. To the Dutch children, what mattered was who was to the left and the right of a target place. To the Namibian children, what mattered was which way the animals were facing the entire time. So instead of being left to right and now facing, say, west, they were all still facing south, and they continued to sit on the table. So what mattered was, what was relevant was the cardinal absolute direction.
So, okay, right, two things. First off, I do wonder if you had a spider on your leg, right? You could sort of say, I don't know, to a Dutch child, be like, there's a spider on your left leg, and you sort of brush it off and it's fine. But if you're with Namibian children, you'd be like, it's on your northwest leg. No, don't turn around. Now it's your southeast leg.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's like a superpower. It sounds that way to us. Because we are just, we don't, I mean, especially with GPS, I really don't need to know which way north is. I can just get as lost as I want, and then my phone will tell me where to go. Now, it is, however, true that if you take a person who has an absolute direction language only, and you spin them around and make them dizzy, they do lose track of which way north is, just like we do. Whereas if you spun me around, I would not forget which way left is.
No, true. But you would never know which way north was.
But I never knew which way north was. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that really demonstrates that it's a cognitive effort then, that they're keeping track from the last time they knew what north was, rather than it's not a magical trick. It is something that's a sort of a decision, as it were, something that is a direct consequence of the language. It's nice. It's really nice to do.
Just as we've learned from studies on place cells and grid cells, it is about memory. They remember and they keep even a non-conscious memory of how they have moved and what that would mean for the direction of north. Whereas those of us whose culture does not pay attention to cardinal directions in the same way, we don't have to.
I do wonder though, okay, so that's sort of where things are in relation to each other. I also wonder about, we were talking about proprioception a bit before the break, but I also wonder about the map that you have of your own body. Because presumably you're not born with it, right?
So how we orient ourselves in space is very culturally dependent. But what isn't is where we put ourselves in our bodies. Mm-hmm. Going back to the experiment we did at the very beginning of this podcast, point to yourself. Where are you pointing? There's generally only two places people point, regardless of their culture, their age, their gender, their life experiences. They point either to the head or to the chest.
I wonder what the ratio was in our comments. I wonder.
We'll do a little study. Yeah.
I can barely imagine saying point to yourself. Like, it sort of doesn't feel right to me to point to your head.
Yeah, point to yourself. And I want to talk about this. And I don't have a big whiz-bang insight to give, because a lot of this is research that I did years ago for an episode about, like, where is your seat of consciousness? Where do you think it is? Where does it feel like it is? And I didn't know enough about consciousness to, like, find an answer, so I never made the episode. But I wanted to share some of the cool things I found on this journey. And one of these days it'll make it into an episode. So, as it turns out, where people point when you ask them to point to themselves depends almost entirely on context. So, for example, there was a great study that was done. I love the experimental design here. They had people go into a room where there was a pole from the floor to the ceiling, and it had this arrow on it, and you could move the arrow up and down. And they told people to just move the arrow until it pointed at them. And as it turns out, if they walk into the room and the arrow is down on the ground at the bottom of the pole, they'll pull it up until it reaches their chest, and they'll stop and they'll say, "There, I did it." But if you begin with the arrow near the top of the pole when they enter the room, they'll only pull it down to their face.
So it's like anchoring, but for arrows and where you are.
Yes, where you think you are in your body is very much dependent on how it's been anchored, right? They could also have a person go in with a blindfold on. And if you have a blindfold on, you're a little bit more likely to have it point at your chest than at your face. If you have a blindfold off, you are much more likely to point it at your eyes, at your face. But this question of where you are in your body has a very specific target in psychology. It's called the ego center. Mm-hmm. And the ego center is the name for where I believe the very middle, the center of myself is. And you can ask people this, and they all understand it, right? They all understand, like, oh yeah, sure, like my life is basically a POV video game. Where am I seeing the world from? So the eyes become this really dominant sense for determining where we think that we are. And interestingly, all the sensory poles influence it. Because if you give someone like a map of the body and you tell them to pinpoint exactly where they think they are, it's almost always a place right in between the eyes, just a little bit back, just a few inches back. Or maybe even like just like a centimeter behind the eyes in between.
Like your conscious center sits just behind your eyes.
That's right. Like if you're some kind of little rat like driving your body around, we think that we are that rat sitting right behind the eyes. But people who have been blind since birth place their ego center in between the eyes, but much further back, almost in the middle of the head, right in between the ears. because sight hasn't dominated and put in its influence on, no, you're right here, you're up here where you see things.
What about deaf? Because I sort of wonder, I mean, there's a lot for people who have, full hearing, full vision. There's a lot going on in your head, right? But I can imagine that for people who are deaf and who use sign language, like their communication center is their hands, right? Does that end up changing things?
If the person is just deaf, no, it doesn't seem to. We'll link studies below, but the eyes are just so rich with information that they position themselves near the eyes. Now, in the congenitally deaf and blind, there's very little information because a person with those conditions is often, it's just hard to even ask them, like, where is yourself? But there are a lot of, just from like anecdotal reading online, there's a lot of discussion of tactile thoughts, dreams being tactile, and what I haven't been able to find is any real confirmation that a deaf and blind person from birth pictures themselves, say, in their fingers or in their lips or somewhere where there's a lot of touch information coming in. I think that even without vision and hearing, we still have other things that make our head a focus, like the breathing and taste. It all comes in through stuff up here. And it also can move around a lot. Our limbs can also move around a lot, but the trunk, the torso, is hypothesized to be an extremely universal anchor point for where we say we are. Because it doesn't move independently. I can't move my torso without also moving my arms. My legs and arms and my head can be in weird positions, but my body is always that central point, which also probably explains why so many of us point to the chest for the self. And of course, there's also the fact that when you feel things, you often feel it in your gut and in your heart. Your heart speaks. And this isn't just about emotions, it's also about what did ancient people do? Aristotle believed that all of our memories and our thoughts were happening in the heart.
Because they thought the brain was there to sort of cool down the body, right? Cool down the blood.
That's right. They thought that the brain's only purpose was to cool down the blood. The heart was clearly more important because when you looked inside a human body, you saw all of these veins and arteries that went everywhere. Clearly, those were the marionette strings that the heart pulled to make us move. It was clearly the seat of consciousness, and this is where we are. So where you think you are in your body isn't just about your sensory holes. It's also about your culture and what you know.
So I also wonder, though, then, that just tracing that backwards, I wonder whether you would get less people saying, I am here, sort of the seat of my ego is right in where my brain is. If you rewound the clock and asked the ancient Greeks, would they have all said in the chest?
Yeah. Yeah, and the ancient Egyptians as well. And so at some point there was a change where we switched from the heart is where my thinking happens to the brain is where my thinking happens. And I mean, a lot of this is, I don't have a point that I've reached with this research, but I've looked a lot into the feeling of mental exhaustion. Like if you're thinking a lot, doesn't it kind of feel like your head is tired? So why didn't ancient people say, man, when I think a lot, my head is tired? Because we don't have nerves in our brain, actually. Generally, if you've been doing a lot of cognitive work, your head area will feel tired because you've been using your eyes a lot, and you haven't been using the other parts of your body a lot. But to me, it's still a bit of a mystery why the brain was so unimportant when it came to the location of the self in the body to the ancients.
I do sort of wonder though, because as you said, you don't have nerve endings in your brain. I mean, it's the reason why you can have brain cells that sort of pink. I sort of wonder whether you feel like your brain is tired because we now know that is where everything is happening. How much it's really difficult to disentangle one from the other. One thing I did think was really interesting that you said though is that it's interesting how, as you said, the eye is this like real magnetic center where so much information comes in from them that it's almost impossible not to imagine that your consciousness is centered near them. But then at the same time, it's interesting how you said that people put their ego center between the eyes, where there isn't an eye. You know?
That's right, yes. Okay, so yes, this reminds me, I think I've told you this before, but I want everyone to hear about the Cyclops effect. If you ask a child who is like, I don't know, 2 years old, like young enough to look through a cardboard tube or to look inside a tube, here's like a tube, okay? They will put the tube right in between their eyes, and they won't be able to look inside of it. And that's because, of course, our brain takes both of the images from both of our eyes and combines them into one image right in between the eyes. And as an adult, we learn that, like, yes, that's how it feels, but I have 2 eyes. And so around the age of, like, 3 and a half, kids start to, when asked to look inside a tube, they put it up to just one eye. They tend to keep both eyes open.
Adorable little Cyclops.
It's really adorable, and this is honestly another reason I haven't done a video on this is that I lost that window with my daughter. I needed to do the experiment with her to get good footage of it happening, and now she's too old. She knows that she has 2 eyes, and she doesn't just, like, vision isn't just coming out of the middle between them. And there's one video on YouTube where a parent asks their kids, and the kids do it. They stick the thing right in between their eyes and get confused about why they can't see inside of it. But I can't use that footage because it's like someone else's children. But it's a phenomenal illustration of this effect, the Cyclops effect.
It sort of feels like this is the perfect opportunity. If you happen to know or live with a small person under the age of 3, see if you can get a video of them doing Cyclops effect and send it in to us.
Yes, please. And of course, don't use anything without a lot of discussion. But it's just hilarious to see it happen. And there's just literally one video on YouTube, and it's like so funny, but also really deep about how we understand our bodies, that it takes a while to learn that you have 2 eyes.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. You just said now you're an adult, you know that you have 2 eyes. But the thing is that I think that you know it intellectually, but I think your body actually often defaults to thinking that you have 1 eye. So the really nice way to do this is if you get a little roll of paper and you hold it up to, say, your right eye, and then you hold your left hand up right next to it and keep both of your eyes open. What will happen very quickly, I mean, initially your brain is like, what's going on? But very quickly, it then looks like you've got a hole in your hand, right? Your brain is essentially combining those 2 images as though you have 1 eye. And I think what's really nice about this is that actually when you're walking around, the reason why your brain is doing this is because you need 1 eye for walking effectively. You know, your little 2-year-old child who's a cute little Cyclops, they are biologically perfect walkers. Mm-hmm. We only switch to 1 eye when we're using tools.
Yeah.
When you're being much more precise and specific, that you know the distance between your eyes starts to matter. Mm-hmm. So these little babies, they're great at walking, terrible hunters, terrible at using tools.
And not to go on about this forever, but if you want to ruin the effect of the hole in the hand, put a photograph of a person's face on your hand. Because the brain privileges faces when it comes to combining 2 different images from each eye. And there's actually another name for this, which is the Cheshire Cat effect, where the face is so important that it stays on top. And it might fade a little bit, but the eyes and the mouth will always be there. The brain doesn't combine them with what the other eye is getting.
I didn't know that. Every day with you, Michael. Every day's a school day.
So the last thing I wanted to say is that I've been trying to tease out the contexts that affect why sometimes we point to the face or we think of the face as the self and why sometimes we don't. For example, if someone said, "Oh, hey, Michael, can I get a picture of you?" If I gave them a photo of my knee, they would be very confused. If I gave them a picture of my entire body from the neck down, they would say, I'm sorry, this is not what we wanted. And I'd be like, what do you mean? That's 90% of my body's surface area. Like, that's me. They'd be like, no, we just wanted your face. And I'm like, but my face is such a small part of my body. How can that be me? At the same time, though, when we're talking with each other, we won't just reference the face with gestures to refer to ourselves. Like, if I said something like, and you know what? She took my car. I point to the chest. It would be very weird to say, she took my car. If I pointed to my face, I'm pointing to my eyes right now. Even though in the visual world of photographs, my face is me. In the world of discourse and talking, I am my chest. And I'm not exactly sure why that all is. The best explanation for the chest gesture for myself, for me, comes from Kinsey Cooper-Ryder, who said that when you're talking, any gesture you make moves the person's eye, unless it's like a very general gesture. So if I say my book, I'll point to my chest, because it doesn't distract you enough, as if I pointed to my shin. You'd be like, oh, why is he pointing to his shin? And you'd have to move your head. But if I point to my chest, or I just put my hand on my chest, I'm emphasizing the word mine without distracting your eye. If I pointed to my head and I said my book, you'd be like, oh, why is he pointing to his temple or his cheek? And it would distract. But the chest is like a vague enough but not far enough away place that it just emphasizes the word. Anyway, it's very mysterious.
It is very mysterious. This is why I like it so much. I like to think that part of this is potentially cultural, and maybe today, Michael, we can make a shift. Maybe we can make it so that everybody from now on, whenever they say something, they go, "What about me?" and just directly points to the end of the note.
Yeah. So I want to throw in one more thing that I've been researching, and that's where we knock on doors. When you go up to a door and you need to knock on it, we usually knock about here at the height of the shoulder or the eyes, somewhere in between there. Even though our hand, hangs down at our waist or something. Why is that? Is that a cross-culturally true thing? Because you could come up to a door and knock at the bottom of the door. But we don't do that. We knock about where our voice would be coming out if we were to be talking to the person. We knock kind of where we might be looking if we were looking at the person. Is that what motivates all of us to knock on doors where we do, rather than I could knock at it down at my waist or right where my hand happened to be? But no, we put our hand up and we knock where our mouth would be.
Maybe. I mean, there's a bit of me that wonders whether it's just because it's sort of the physics of the angle of your head, but it's slightly easier.
Sure. Maybe it's just easier to control power and volume in that position.
But it does feel like a communication syndrome. It does come back to everything that you're describing. It's almost like your center of mass, but it's like the center of the right?
The ego center. Exactly. So it is. There's a lot of kind of funny stuff here. There aren't a lot of clear answers. And yet, I feel like we know less about where the self resides in the body than we do how we understand where our bodies are in space.
Which is something that happens quite a lot. I mean, if you think about, we have explored the galaxy, the solar system, and yet still the Mariana Trench is a rare anomaly in our understanding of the ocean floor.
I know, we know more about the surface of the moon, or of Neptune, than we do the ocean floor. So I call this the proximity paradox. It seems like the closer something is, the harder it is to look at it and understand it.
So when it comes to the question of where are you, finding where you are on the Earth, easy peasy. Finding where you are in a room, a bit harder. Finding where you are in your body, genuine mystery.
Is that even a sensible question?
And this is what I like about this program, right? You do a program on where are you. You're not going to get this kind of stuff on other science podcasts, are you?
No, you're gonna leave. You're not gonna leave going, oh, that's where I am. You're gonna leave going, what does where mean and who am I?
I no longer understand any of the things that I thought I could take for granted. Well, okay, that I think is a good point to leave it for this episode. Make sure that you are following the rest of science wherever you get to listen to your podcast, or you can like and subscribe if you'd like to do this.
And if you'd like to ask us any questions, we'll have episode in the future. You can send that question to the rest of this science and more.
And you need to count how many words on this list begin with the letter S. Okay? Very simple. Just keep the number in your head. Okay. All right, here are the words. Bed, awake, tired, dream, blanket, doze, yawn, night, dark, pillow, rest, and nap. Got it? Okay?
Yeah.
All right. I want you to hold on to that number in your head. And just know that this episode today is all about cognitive ghosts. We'll come back to it in a moment.
Hannah, I can't wait to see what the point of that list of words were, but I will tell the listeners out there that for this episode, Hannah and I decided to explore the phrase cognitive ghosts and what that means to us. So we've both come prepared with some cognitive ghost stories, and I can't wait to see how we both interpreted that and how it all comes together.
Okay, have you managed to hold on to that number in your head?
Yes, I have.
Right, how many of that list started with the letter S?
0.
Correct. Right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 3 words, and you need to tell me whether these words were on the list. All right?
Okay.
Blanket?
Blanket was.
Correct. Jellyfish?
No.
Correct. Sleep?
No.
How is your brain feeling right now?
Well, it's feeling a little, how do I describe this? I think I've heard of studies like this before, where there's like a word that should so totally be on the list, but you don't mention it, and so I start to confabulate that it was on the list. I would have thought sleep was one of them, if I hadn't been paying very close attention to whether the word started with S or not. And so when sleep never showed up, what I did was I was waiting for it. I was like, it's the only S word that's going to fit this list. And it never happened. And I'm like, sleep is very conspicuously absent.
What is this word? Is when someone is familiar with an animal of the deja vu experience. So, essentially, what is going on when I ask you if the word sleep appeared? Is that you know that it wasn't on the list because it starts with an S, and you've already told them out loud that there were no S words. That's what happened. At the same time, the word feels kind of spookily familiar, right? Sort of like triggers this memory that isn't a memory. And this is what they describe as artificial deja vu. This is the only way, really, that we have to trigger deja vu in a lab in order to study it.
Oh, so we get people to think of it sort of twice. And then later, it's deja vu-like when they hear it again.
That's right. Even though they know it was a false memory, they never actually happened.
I gotta say, it's so much less real deja vu. Hammered home with the cognitive ghosts. Things, it means a lot of things, but deja vu is it's like really, really hard to conjure up yourself. Bleeding through it, interacts with this idea, but
So the thing that is quite nice about these experiments is that when you do this to people, when they're in an fMRI, it's not the hippocampus, the memory center of your brain that lights up. Instead, when you hear the word sleep, area of your brain that is responsible for decision making, conflict resolution. That's the bit that kicks off. And so the argument here is that deja vu, as we experience it, it's not this false memory. It's more like your fact-checking software, as it were, in your head is kind of running through. It sort of feels as though there's something familiar, but you're running through your memories and not finding it. So it's your brain glitching, essentially saying, wait, no, have we been here before? We haven't been here before. This familiarity that I'm feeling is a phantom signal.
Right.
And that you can see in the scan. So even though, as you say, it's nowhere near as cool as real deja vu, seeing in the scan is nonetheless.
Wow. I love that, because again, it's not as cool of an experience, but we just can't catch deja vu in the act and study it. It's still so mysterious. You're right, the leading hypothesis for the feeling of deja vu, that, oh my gosh, this happened before, this is so familiar, but I can't tell why, that might be your brain trying to solve a little problem that it's creating for itself. The processing of the data happens way faster than the perceptual awareness, so your brain is already responding with feelings and associations to the thing before you actually see it, and you're going, hold on, this is already here, deja vu. So that list strategy allows us to do a similar thing, with less effective power. It's not like, whoa, tricky. Is my brain okay? But if it allows us to recreate some of those brain processes, maybe we'll finally be able to study deja vu better. I would love to be able to reduce it for real.
For real, I know. There's no way.
Well, I could convince people about the sorcerer. I could convince them that demons were at work. I don't know. That would obviously be my first use of the technology.
Because that's the sum total of all scientific knowledge. The thing is, so much about how your brain works is memory is essentially a survival strategy. It's like, can you take the experiences that you had before and apply them in the future to make life easier, to make your survival more likely? And so what we know now about memory is that it's not like watching a video and when you feel it. It's like you take the gist of your experience, that's the stuff that you record. So essentially what's happening when you have deja vu in real life, when you have a kind of full-blown one, is you, I don't know, walk into a room and there's something about the gist of that room that triggers a feeling of familiarity. Maybe the chairs are laid out and there's something about them that's similar to the way the chairs are laid out in your family. So your brain is like, oh, okay, I've been here before, there's this familiarity, and goes looking for the relevant thing. And when it doesn't find it, that's the experience that you have, kind of very strange feeling. You've been there before because you have the familiarity but without it.
Yes, and it shows us that those two things, familiarity and the memory, are separate. That we can feel that something is familiar. We can know that we know something, but not immediately be able to recall it. And that very specific phenomenon has a different name.
That's presque-vu. Presque-vu, it's like on the tip of your tongue.
The tip of the tongue, yes. I love presque-vu because it's so trippy. It's so weird, and it makes me feel so out of control of my own mind. And it's not just a me or a you thing. It's like a socially contagious phenomenon. Presque-vu is the experience of, as we said, tip of the tongue. When you know that you know something, but you cannot call it to mind and say it. You can picture the face of that actor. Oh my gosh, I've seen like every movie they've been in, but what is their name? The people around you often can't help, because in some way, that thought in your mind is contagious, and everyone at the dinner table goes, oh yeah, no, what is that? No, it wasn't. Well, I can name all the movies. Or I can picture the person. They're a coworker of mine. We all know them. And it doesn't come to you until you stop trying to find it. The whole time you know. It's not like a remember. You know that it's there. It's in there. And then you change gears. You start a different topic of conversation. You go make a sandwich, and suddenly you go, oh, Gary Sinise. That is the actor who played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. Duh. Presque-vu was also a kind of cognitive, ghostish thing. We, I think, can study it better than deja vu. We know a bit more about what might be going on. It seems to be the brain trying to help us, except it missed the mark. And we're thinking of all the movies and all the other actors that have been in that movie, or other related things to the target. And to help us, the brain inhibits recollection of the actual fact we want, and facts that are adjacent to the ones that we're pulling up. And so while you're in that space trying to access that target, you're getting everything but the brains start helping you in a different way, and now you can open the box and that's the target.
I really like it. Well, I mean, I don't like that feeling at all. Actually, despite the words I didn't just have. The other one, there's one other which is called jamais vu, which is where you can sort of take something quite solid and make it into something quite ghostly. And this, by the way, jamais vu, is the feeling of not knowing something. This is very easy to trigger in life. So there's a paper which is called the induction of jamais vu in the laboratory. What a great title for this paper. Essentially what they did is they took loads of university students and they told them to take a single word and repeat it over and over and over on a piece of paper. So they used words like door, money, the was one of them. And the students were told to keep writing as fast as they could, and they were only told to stop once they felt peculiar, or when their hands hurt, or when they just couldn't take it. And about 70% of the students stopped because they felt peculiar. They felt peculiar before their hands hurt. And normally it's only about 30 repetitions that you need to do that can induce it. You just choose whichever word you like, write it out 30 times, and it'll start to do something really strange in your brain.
I think so many of us have accidentally discovered this like as kids. You repeat a word over and over again. Cellar, 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 cellar. And then you start to go, how is that a word? This seems so weird suddenly.
Doesn't make any sense.
We're both moving in the direction of easier to study, but more eerie feeling.
The author of that paper, the introduction of Johnny in the book, called Chris Miller, he thinks that there's a reason for Johnny, which is that you have repetitive behavioural loops, like over and over and over and over, it makes them really vulnerable. Right, it's sort of a survival thing. His idea, I mean, difficult to validate this, but his idea is that if you have neurons that are in the same time, then the brain triggers damage to make the familiar feel like it's really alien, to sort of shock the brain out doing the same thing again and again and again and again, and forcing the brain to go and engage in something.
Wow, that's a pretty clever technique, and I like that because it makes so much sense for survival, or that you just create your own novelty. But it's such a flexible trick to being bored. Just looking at an object, like looking at a model, you're just like, oh my gosh, models are so freaking weird. It really just it's our brain trying to keep things fresh.
Feel close to your brain. They're really weird if you think about them.
Yeah, hey, we saw some jamais vu here. Exactly. It's like, we all know that things fall down, but which way is down? And we start to go, oh shoot, which way is down? I could have answered that 5 minutes ago, but now I'm
stuck. Now I'm stuck. See, there's lots of these, right? There's lots of different situations where your brain is, you have these two underlying systems in your brain, either familiarity or whatever it might be, and they're just mismatching them so slightly.
Yes, there are so many déjà-vus, or so many vus, if you will, depending on how people decide to describe the word, that we know even less about. For example, déjà vu is something that I've tried to research to know about. What is it? Déjà vu is that feeling when you witness something and realize, and you go, hey, I saw this in a dream before. That's happened to me. I've been like, oh my gosh, I dreamt this, guys. And one, it's boring to everyone but me, right? Like, no one else feels this eeriness. They're just like, okay, man, I don't know, like, you're not psychic, stop. But it's a weird feeling, and you could only really find information on it on like Reddit, where people are like, yeah, that's happened to me, or something like sort of new age wellness blogs talk about it. And why that feeling happens, we don't know. Is it related to deja vu, where instead of thinking, oh, this has happened before in real life, something's a bit different, and we start thinking, hey, this happened before, but in a dream? We honestly don't know. So that's why I think cognitive ghosts is a great overarching category name for these things. There's so much research that still has to be done.
But the thing is, I mean, there's lots of examples of where people have had memories of things that happened in past lives, right? That they have discussed and been absolutely convinced that they happened before. But that actually, once you dig into them, our brains are not very good at remembering the origin of where our stories come from. So there's a couple of really famous stories about this, that people have been hypnotized, and then while they were under hypnosis, they've come up with incredibly elaborate stories. There's one in the 50s where an American housewife called Virginia Typee, and when she was hypnotized, she claimed to be this woman called Bridie Murphy, who was born in Cork in 1798. She gave all these details about her husband, the grocers, all these Irish songs and so on. And everyone was really stunned because she'd never been to Ireland, and there was no, internet to look things up. And how could she know the name of this obscure 19th century Irish grocer, which she got right, by the way? And then this is all in the 1950s. Journalists end up going to Chicago, start knocking on doors. They discover that there was a Irish immigrant who lived across the street from her when she was younger, and the neighbour used to tell her stories when she was a kid, singing all these songs, including the names of all of these places. And the neighbour's name was Bridie Murphy Corkwell, right? So it's like you have the memory, but you don't remember where it came from. This has happened over and over again, where people have thought that they are recalling something from a past life, but actually it's from a novel that they read or a story that they heard. So I think that's the thing about the deja revo, essentially, is that it might be a deja vu, where you're getting the familiarity and the memory mixed up, or it might be that you have experienced some similarities in the story before, but you don't remember you watched it, you just thought that you watched it.
Yes. I think the nature of memory is responsible for so many of the cool things that we love to share and talk about and experience. I've thought a lot about whether reality was different when I was a kid. This is, again, like a weird one, but you'll see this on Instagram and TikTok all the time, where people are like, you remember how in like the 90s, everything was like more colorful, or like the sky was bluer? And I feel that way too. I feel like the color of light was different, but I can't tell if it's because photographs of the time used different film, and printing techniques for books and magazines were different, and reality was the same, but I just can only remember it now by looking at photos, which give me the wrong impression of how things looked. But we prototypicalize our experiences when they turn into memories. So colors become more primary, making them blockier and brighter and more saturated. So when we think back to, man, my school was so bright, and now when I return as an adult, later in life, and it just seems smaller and dingier and duller. A lot of it is that remembering, like you said, is not a perfect replica. I think the word remember is perfect. We are remembering. We're like Frankensteining together what happened out of pieces that are slightly different this time. But it's not just memories that are being confabulated and constructed. It's also live experience. Blind sight is one of the freakiest cognitive ghosts. Blind sight is the phenomenon whereby someone is legally blind, they cannot see, they can't read a street sign, and yet they act as though they can see. It's very paradoxical. First of all, how does it happen? It's brain damage. It can be caused, for example, by severing the two halves of the brain, cutting the corpus callosum. A person with blind sight is legally blind. They need help. They can't read a book. They can't read a street sign. But if you throw something at them, they will flinch and they will try to block it.
What?
And if you ask them, well, why did you raise your arm? They cannot tell you why. They literally don't understand, and they confabulate answers. They say, oh, well, didn't you tell me that you were about to throw something? Or, well, I suddenly needed to raise my hand. The famous example is that you can show these people a prompt, like, go get me a drink from the fridge. And they can't read it. They have no recollection of reading those words, and yet they will get up and go to the door. And if you say, hey, where are you going? They come up with all kinds of reasons. Oh, I heard a sound. And they truly believe these explanations.
Wait, hold on. I don't understand. How can they possibly read it if they're blind?
Because a non-conscious part of their brain is receiving the visual signal and responding to it, but the awareness is not getting the message. And so they can't access what's actually happening in front of them. Their eyes are still processing what they're seeing. It's just not being told to their conscious self. So they see the message, go get me a drink. And when I say they, I mean at an unconscious level. But then memory and awareness is never told. So their body starts reacting to things, like even a bump in the road. They'll avoid the bump in the road, but they won't be able to tell you how they did it. And they come up with a ghostly, fabricated reason on the spot. Why did you take a step to the left? I don't think I did. I think I kind of tripped. But they didn't trip. It's just their brain is always trying to explain their own behavior to themselves, and they buy it wholesale. Blindsight in humans is really hard to study because you kind of have to wait for someone to have this particular kind of brain damage.
And under what conditions would someone get that kind of brain damage? That sounds like a sort of surgical intervention.
There's so many causes. There are all these different stages of visual processing in the brain, and problems usually caused by stroke or tumors or pain. To almost any of those regions can sometimes result in blindsight. It's not common enough that we know that much about it, but it does provide yet another example of the fact that there's you, and then there are these ghosts inside that are doing a bunch of stuff without your authority and control.
These sort of shadows of your central self.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot. It might be maybe part because you were describing about where do you sit in your body. We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. I think that it's very tempting to believe that you have this sort of homunculus, as it were, this sort of like centre of yourself. There's like one version of you that exists. And all of these systems, your sight system, your memory system, your familiarity system, are kind of spinning off like a spider diagram from this central version of you. But when you describe things like that, when you describe people whose systems function perfectly well, but they just can't explain to themselves, it does make me wonder whether actually the whole idea of us having a single central self, like a homunculus, is actually real at all. Maybe we're just like the sum of ghosts rather than like a single individual with all of these things spinning off it.
I know. It's really trippy, and it's really frustrating because as easy as it is to believe that I'm a homunculus, which means a little person inside my head pulling the levers and looking out the eyes, you then have to wonder, well, who's inside the mind of that little person? And you get an infinite regress that doesn't explain anything.
I think one thing that we do know for sure is that when there's a mismatch in the levers, the homunculus gets very confused.
Yeah, and it can be scary or it can be fun, depending on, how you interpret it. For me personally, I've got a really strong feeling of what's called high place phenomenon. I don't like heights at all, and I've gotten more and more scared of them as I've gotten older. It was so bad at one point that I looked this up. Basically, what high place phenomenon is that when you are up high and there's an edge or like a cliff, or you're on the patio of a high apartment building, I start to feel like I'm being drawn towards the edge. And it can feel either like there's a slant and I'm actually falling, or I'm being drawn, or I'm gonna fall off, basically. Or it can feel almost like an internal compulsion, like there's something in me that makes me want to jump. Our best idea about what causes this high place phenomenon is that right away, the high place, the ledge, the cliff scares you. And you become so scared that you could fall off, that your brain doesn't know how to deal with that fear because you don't normally just suddenly leap 2 meters forward, right? And so to explain the fear, your brain creates a complete ghost, a confabulated, unreal desire. You must be falling in that direction, or you must want to, because nothing else would explain the fear. And so now you've got 2 things, the fear and an illusory belief that you're going to be pulling yourself off the edge.
I have to tell you, when I first moved to London, I got this feeling so intensely every time I got on the tube that what I really wanted to do was to jump off the platform. As the tube train came into the station, that it would be so easy to do it, and then sort of catching myself doing it. And I ended up talking to a therapist, seeing a therapist, and talking to them about it. And apparently, this version of high place phenomenon, or l'appel du vide, or the call of the void, there's a nice French name for everything in this episode, it turns out.
There is, yes. I love that, the call of the void. Hello, I'll answer.
Yes. In Londoners, on the tube, it's phenomenally common. 60% of Londoners apparently have this exact feeling. And that kind of demonstrates, I think, that it's like, this is something that is in all of us, this mismatch, this sort of this fight, this tension between the different versions of ourselves that's going on.
That's right, because the point here is that this desire to fling yourself off the ledge or into the oncoming train wasn't already there already. It seems to be the only interpretation the brain can come up with to explain certain fears that are generated and the strength of those fears. So, yeah, we're in a lot of ways just along for the ride, and it's a crazy ride.
There are other examples of this, like there's a tussle going on in your mind of what you want to do. I'm thinking about, like, when you see a really, really cute puppy.
Yes, it's called cute aggression, and it is actually a pretty new area of investigation. We've known about this forever, but it's been hard to pinpoint what's going on. Cute aggression describes the feeling we have when we see something cute that goes beyond just, oh, I want to protect you, I want to keep you warm, and it turns into, I'm overwhelmed by how cute these photos are, or this puppy, and I just want to squeeze it, and I just want to bite it, eat you up. And the study of this, I just love. Let me open this up. The researchers just showed people super cute things and then listened to them talk about it, and they coded people's responses. And of course, you're going to see the usual caretaking things. I want to protect it. I want to hold it. They say appraisal utterances like, oh, that's so cute. Or maybe they'll say, I want to approach it. But they might feel overwhelmed. I can't stand how cute this is. But then you go even further and you start to see things that can be coded as aggression. Like you see it and you just want to go, grrr. You want to say grrr. You want to squeeze it. You want to pinch the cheeks. You want to eat it up.
I want to eat you. Yeah.
Through your gritted teeth you speak. And in a lot of ways, this is, I think, similar to the ghost of, I want to fling myself off the edge. But it's not being created by the brain as an explanation for a fear. It's being created by the brain to bring itself back down to homeostasis. That the instinct we have to protect and pay attention to and cuddle and care for cute things is so overwhelming that the neurotransmitters responsible flood the brain. And to bring itself back down to normal, it has to bring in other neurotransmitters that do the opposite effect and encourage aggressive behaviors. That's the current leading theory, because we've looked at all the other options, but it's just that you see it, it's so cute, but you need to also push it away, but you also need to, like, hurt it because you're being overwhelmed by your desire to not hurt it, and it's very confusing. And we see this in other cases too, like when people get so overwhelmed with joy and happiness, they cry.
Or, yeah, something really awful happens and they laugh.
I know, and it's frightening But again, it's another kind of ghost that's created, not one that's there as an explanation, but one that's there to help right the ship, to keep it going straight. Oh, you're going too far in the happiness direction, time to cry. Oh, that was really, really awkward and terrible and tragic, and now you're laughing. Ah, shoot. But at least, like, together, they keep us normal.
There's all these different versions of you that continue fighting inside your head.
You know, and on the topic of these ghosts and how there sort of seems to be multiple versions of ourselves inside ourself, another thing that happens to me a lot is the hypnic jerk. It's sometimes called a hypnagogic jerk. As I'm falling asleep, I will suddenly twitch and wake up. I have a very strong sense of feeling that I was about to fall. In fact, I'd love to know in the comments how other people experience this. For me, it's almost always accompanied or prefaced by a dream where I'm doing something like riding a bike or climbing a tree, and then suddenly I fall over and I wake up. The science tells us that the hypnic jerk occurs because when we sleep, our muscle tone and our blood pressures goes down. If our awareness isn't quite asleep yet, it's unaware of what the heck the body is doing. And as far as it knows, our body has just lost all tone and support, so that's what it feels like we're falling. So it goes, we're falling, like, it's this brace yourself. That's what that jerk is. What I find so weird is that, for me at least, it's not just an out of nowhere falling experience. It is, in my head at least, the culmination of a whole dream. I've been skateboarding for 30 minutes, and then suddenly I tripped and fell, and that's when the jerk happened. So either my dream knew that this jerk was coming, that this relaxing, my body's gonna lose its muscle tone as I sleep, or it was completely caught off guard, and then has confabulated a memory of an entire dream that was happening just before, an entire explanation for why I suddenly felt like I was falling. And that 30 minutes of dream has just been put into my head at that moment.
You taught me something, Michael, because I had a different understanding of what was going on with the picture.
Okay, tell me.
Well, okay, so I thought, but I just checked and you were on the right. So, congratulations. This is not what it is. You know,
Okay, so I want to hear what it's not.
Okay, so I thought it was that at some point during your sleep cycle, it's important that your body goes into a state of sensory paralysis so that you're not flailing around and hurting yourself while you're asleep. And that this is what can go wrong when you have, sometimes you can wake up where your mind wakes up before you come out of the state of paralysis, and then there's night terrors.
Your sleep demons.
Or sleep paralysis, right?
Yes.
So I thought, incorrectly apparently, that what was happening was that your body was going into paralysis. To check that you were in paralysis, your body was testing. It was testing. But apparently that's not true.
Was testing it out. Are we ready to sleep? Is the body shut off?
Am I ready? No.
Sleep paralysis is like literally the opposite of the hypnic jerk. Wait, so sleep paralysis is like a different combination of problems between these two different selves. The physical self that is relaxing or under paralysis, so that while you're sleeping, you're not completely harmed. And then the awareness of like you're actually conscious what's happening and how am I creating a story around this.
Regardless of the reason, your why would your body do it? It doesn't make much sense. It sounds like something's going wrong.
A lot of people have asked that question, and funny enough, the answer is that these phenomena are in another way a kind of dreams, meaning not a confabulated phantom, but something that's swirl around, even though it's so long, like a vestigial cognition. Fred Cooley at the University of Colorado, his theory is that the hypnic jerk is this old thing from evolution that happened in trees. Because we don't see hypnic jerks in all animals. Now, we do see them in cats and dogs. You know, they'll startle themselves awake. And we don't know what they were thinking or how it felt. That's the problem.
We do. They were dreaming of sausages.
Back when we were being attacked by a predator, there was and sometimes a hypnic jerk can actually be associated with that too. Sometimes I've felt like my team like a big small kitchen. That's why. But the tree hypothesis is that back when we were living in trees, as long muscle memory, you could fall out of the tree. And so that jerk is a response to help you better right yourself and become more stable because you're about to go into the relaxed portion of sleep where your muscles are constantly flexing. So it's like a corrective measure that we no longer need because we sleep on mattress.
Hey, so this is a different kind of ghost. I mean, it's like there's ghosts in every direction. There's the two versions of yourself that are different. But there's also this lingering memory of your ancient past.
Exactly.
I like that. Because actually, when we decided we were going to do an episode on cognitive ghosts, Michael and I took the time, went off, decided how we wanted to interpret it. And actually, one of the things that I was thinking about was this idea of things that we currently think that are actually just being hanging of our historical past. And one example that I was thinking about was have sort of my family really into crystals.
Right.
Anyway, there is this great myth that if you wear amethyst, you can't get drunk. So if you're going on a night out, pop a bit of amethyst on and you'll be fine. Just do whatever.
Okay.
Thank you for your... I can see by your face you are...
Oh no, yeah, right. All I'm saying is I've tried it. That's the cops don't buy it.
The cops don't buy it. The thing is, this I think is a really interesting example of another type of cognitive ghost. Because actually what used to happen in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, what people would do is they would have these feasts that would last for, hours, maybe even days. And if you were a kind of canny politician or a very clever noble person, you would want to keep sharp during all of these feasts when there is wine flowing around the room. Now, important to say that actually what they used to do is to slightly water down their wine, like a ratio of 1 to 2. So they have this slightly purple hue. So what they would do is they would have goblets that were made of amethyst. Because in that situation, when you had water in it, you could not tell when someone was holding it that they were
Oh my God.
So actually, amethyst was this way to trick people into thinking that you're drinking so,
Right, and so the fact that you're not drunk must be explained by the amethyst glass, the crystal.
rather than and over time that kind of really solid idea has morphed into something that's this echo. Another example of this is with salt, because of course before refrigeration, salt was absolutely vital for human survival. You would use it to preserve meat for the winter. It was also, by the way, incredibly expensive, difficult to harvest. The word salary even comes from the Roman practice of paying soldiers a salarium, right, an allowance to buy salt, because this is the thing that would allow you to survive.
That's amazing. I love that. I love sitting in a restaurant looking at the pepper, being like, there's so much pepper here. People used to die for pepper.
Right?
And salt is salt. All this in the restaurant would just be like, that's all right. But it used to be that was your salary.
That was your salary. Right. So this is it, because the idea of spilling salt, it wasn't just this sort of moment of like, oh, I made a bit of a mess. It was this devastating financial loss and this threat to your entire family's winter food supply. So it became this idea that the devil arrived. If you spilled salt, the devil would appear. So you have to throw salt over your left shoulder because the devil is there. But what happened is the reason for caring so much about salt has dissipated, but the remnants of our stories that we tell ourselves and each other from generation to generation to generation, this is like the oral history of something that really used to scare our ancestors. I think that's just a different kind of version of a cognitive ghost.
Right. It haunts us in a more innocuous form still to this day.
Totally. But you know what? I also, in interpreting this title, I also came up with a few other cognitive ghosts that happen inside the body, or maybe even outside the body, and I reckon we should come back to those after the break.
All right. Welcome back. So far, we've been talking about cognitive ghosts inside your own mind. But Hannah, you're going to tell us about some that